Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. Today, I'm going to share with you a little information I'm learning now, learning more and more about the impact of soy on thyroid and early cognitive decline. So we've all heard about, the risks with phytoestrogens impacting sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen blockage, or estrogen mimicry. Um, and the impact both on adults and even on kids or infants and infant formula. We'll get into that a little bit. But this is specifically about soy's impact on our thyroid hormone. And there's one, I'll start off with this one, the early cognitive decline, which I had not heard before. So let's just jump right in here. There was a study done in Hawaii in the early 90s by a Dr. Lori White. It was actually announced, it was published or announced in 1999 when they finally finished it up, but there was their conclusion. So I'll just kind of give you the quick summary and then we'll get into it a little bit. 2 or more servings of tofu per week in midlife makes you more likely to have cognitive decline, senile dementia, and or brain atrophy as you get older, compared to people who eat little or no soy. And it is these same phytoestrogens, also called, isoflavones. They're called isoflavones, these in soy. A lot of plants have phytoestrogens. Isoflavones and even some have isoflavones, but they're very dense in soy, of course. Specifically, the foods they were looking at were soy, milk, tofu, and soy protein products. They all have very significant levels of isoflavones. And this group that they looked at was over 8,000 Japanese men living in Hawaii. A lot of they were part of the Honolulu Heart Project, which took place in the 60s and 70s, and they were recording their diets at that time, looking for relationships between their diet and heart disease or heart health. But they took these men, this again in the 90s, so after this lifetime of their eating habits, because many of them do or did eat a lot of tofu. Again, they were Japanese men, and in Japan, tofu is a major, is a significant part of their diet. So they conducted cognitive testing on 3,700 of these men, and they used magnetic resonance on about 574, 5 of them, and did autopsies on another 290, and they, as well as analyzed, did cognitive tests on 500 of their wives who had eaten, as you would assume, the same diet that the men had. So it just added to the population, as well as brought in female population to the study. And these men, the ones they looked at, had eaten tofu at least twice a week. So that was kind of like considered the experimental group, as opposed to the control group who ate less or little or no tofu. The men they were looking at had eaten tofu at least twice a week. These men had accelerated brain aging, diminished cognitive ability, and were more than twice as likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Now, that's pretty significant. Twice as likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease from eating tofu. They found in this group the correlation, of course, is a correlation, so we can't say it directly from that, but those who had eaten tofu at least twice a week had the accelerated brain aging, diminished cognitive ability, and more than twice as likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. MRI scans of these men revealed enlarged ventricles in the brain, and the autopsy showed lower brain weights compared to those who didn't eat or ate very little tofu. So, yes, there's been a lot of questions about this study. The statistical probability or the accuracy of these findings has been calculated at 95% or higher, just because of the way they conducted the study. They looked for other confounding factors in their diet that could have caused these outcomes, as well as any correlations with obesity, age, education level, and they just didn't find any. The primary correlation they found, the primary factor that seemed to be consistent with the findings was the tofu consumption. And actually, the more tofu eaten, the more cognitive impairment and brain atrophy they found. So, of course, you could imagine this study's taken some criticism from the soy food industry, the soy industry, of course. Well-funded, huge industry, some of the biggest food manufacturers, food producers in our country, who are actually in the world, really. They're producing soy products and shipping them everywhere, but really in the US, large soy consumption, a lot of soy in our processed food, and they have a lot of money, and they back, nutritional organizations, Nutrition Academy. They fund research at schools and other scientific research that allows published research that allows them to find what they want them to find. But this study was called a strong and well-designed study by two researchers from the FDA's National Laboratory for Toxicological Research, specifically Dan Sheehan and Daniel Dorge. They're at the FDA's National Laboratory for Toxicological Research. They're looking for this toxicity from whatever source is their job. They call it a strong, well-designed study. So obviously they are not being paid by the soy industry for their research. Now, what is the mechanism? What part of tofu or these isoflavones could interfere with or cause this cognitive decline and brain atrophy? Well, specifically, the isoflavones interfere with an enzyme called tyrosine kinase, which in the hippocampus, which affects learning. The hippocampus affects learning and memory. So this tyrosine affects the function of the hippocampus. The phytoestrogens also cause decrease in brain calcium binding protein, which is protective against disease and affects the production of BDNF. You probably heard of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is involved in the creation of brain cells. So basically, the phytoestrogens affect this disease protection and brain cell production. That's pretty significant. Why roll the dice with that? There is actually one isoflavone specifically called Genocide. So there are several types of isoflavones. There's three specifically that tend to be very active in our bodies as far as hormone disruption. But this one's called Genocide. Reduces the DNA synthesis in the brain, which again decreases the production of new brain cells. Dr. Lori White, who conducted the study, found that her final opinion was that these phytoestrogens behave much more like drugs than they did nutrients. So I'm going to link to that study. I won't get too much deeper in that, but I'll link to that study in the show notes so you can look closer if you want. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's also a goitrogenic. Soy is considered a goitrogenic food, so it affects thyroid. We know goiter is considered to be something affected by a lack of or a low iodine level, because the iodine is very much involved in the production of thyroid. So if someone has low iodine in their diet, they're at greater risk for being goitrogenic or developing goiter, right? And there are a lot of goitrogenic foods that have that affect this, goiter, that can affect goiter, but not that we're ingesting at the level that we are getting isoflavones from soy. They don't have the level of isoflavones, and we're just not eating enough of them. But soy is just pervasive in the diet, right? Some people eat it intentionally. Sometimes you're eating it, you don't even realize it because it's just in your food. It's a filler in the processed food. So goitrogenic foods, they block the synthesis of thyroid hormones. Okay. So it's, not hard to believe, since estrogen is known to block the effect of thyroid. This is why women's thyroid gland in women are twice the size of the thyroid of men. It helps overcome that effect of estrogen being in their system and the estrogen fluctuations. Estrogen can diminish thyroid hormone. So, ladies, so those of you who have dealt with low thyroid, it's unfortunately is part of your chemistry. That not that you have to live with it, but certainly treat it, but understand that your struggle is related to, in many cases, the impact of either, it could be something you're eating, but generally speaking, estrogen is impacting your thyroid negatively. So, uh, the now the phytoestrogens were not only linked to low thyroid or hypothyroidism, but also Hashimoto's, which is the autoimmune form of low thyroid, as well as thyroid cancer. So you've got, general low thyroid. Hashimoto's is when your immune system attacks the thyroid and thyroid production. Your immune system is directly involved. And then thyroid cancer, we'll actually get into that. So because we're going to get into the mechanism of this as well. But the National Cancer Institute believes that the high occurrence of thyroid cancer in women does suggest that hormone factors are involved. There's been an increase in thyroid disease since the 1970s. Actually, a 42% increase in thyroid cancer between 1975 and 1996. And it's one of the most common cancers in kids and teenagers. Okay, think about growth. That's when they're growing the most. Insulin levels are very high. For females, their estrogen levels are, they're coming on the scene at a high level. They're often erratic. Thyroid issues are not uncommon with teenagers. So because just a time of transition. So when we start adding in soy, again, another factor, hormone disruptor, that they really don't need, obviously. But it could be causing some of these problems because of the increase of soy intake since the 70s. In fact, there was actually there's an increase of use of soy infant formula during that same time, the 70s to the 90s. 25% of bottle-fed infants in the U.S. are actually fed soy formula. It's the highest rate of soy formula consumption in the world. So, is the U.S. Now, Japan is known for its high consumption of tofu, as I mentioned before, far more than China. China really doesn't have a high intake of soy, despite popular opinion, what we're told, to help sell it. In terms of isoflavones, the average daily intake in China is about 3 milligrams. Not very much. Doesn't sound like much, does it? 3 milligrams a day of isoflavones. In Japan, it's closer to 25 to 28 milligrams per day. And of course, Japan has a much higher incidence of goiter and Hashimoto's. Now, if we look at soy formula for infants, that are ingesting it in the U.S., they're getting from their soy formula about 38 milligrams of isoflavones per day. And that's not an adjustment for weight. That's just the absolute value. So again, 3 in China, 25, 28, maybe 30 in Japan, 38 for our infants. Okay, so if you adjust that for weight, you're talking about 10 times the impact, right? On a say a 10 or 12 pound baby versus a 140 pound adult. Remember, these are drugs, not nutrients. So how is this happening? Let's get into the mechanism of it. Isoflavones, specifically the Genocide, as I mentioned before, and dietazine, inhibit thyroid peroxidase. It's called TPO, if you're doing any kind of research on it. But that's very much involved in the synthesis of T3 and T4. So if it's inhibiting a major enzyme, thyroid peroxidase, that's involved in the production of thyroid, we're getting in again, thyroid production. it's it's not hard to understand why, if we're taking in 25, 30 milligrams of isoflavones, that we're having these disruptions. Specifically deals with the iodization of the tyrosine. So, or tyrosine, depending how you want to pronounce it. And this can happen whether or not there's enough iodine in the diet. So whether there's ample iodine or a low iodine, the isoflavones can still interfere with this iodization. They just keep the iodine and the tyrosine from interacting. And so this would increase a drop in T3 and T4, as well as increase TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. So you may have one or the other. You may just, your T3, T4 levels may be normal. Maybe your T4 levels are normal. T3 might be low, or you just show an increase, like a high TSH level, which means the thyroid gland is working overtime to try to keep up to produce enough thyroid, but it's under stress. So researchers at Cornell University Medical College found a much higher incidence of Hashimoto's, the autoimmune version of thyroid, in kids who were fed soy formula. So fed it as a child, a baby, obviously, finding a higher incidence of Hashimoto's as they got older into their, adolescence. There's a report in the British Medical Journal that warned that soy during early childhood could lead to hypothyroidism. I'm going to link to these so you can check them out for yourself again. But this is not stuff we normally hear. We're hearing all the good, wonderful, happy, rainbow, wonderful things about soy all the time, and what a wonderful, heart healthy, great, source of protein for people who are not wanting to eat as much meat. You can argue that. Actually, I have already, but we're not hearing this. We're not hearing about the thyroid disruption and the effects of hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's on kids, taking in soy formula or eating soy food. There was a Japanese study that looked at 30 milligrams. Oh, they gave their study, the group, they gave the group 30 grams, not 30 milligrams, 30 grams of pickled soybeans per day. And they found that caused thyroid disruptions in as little as 30 days. And all subjects of this study were given seaweed every day to make sure they had enough thyroid intake. They showed increased TSH levels, so that's the thyroid stimulating hormone, and decreased thyroxine levels. Again, that's directly involved in the synthesis of T3 and T4. Some got goiter, some got hypothyroidism, so low thyroid. And there were actually two groups. One they gave them the 30 grams of pickled soybeans for 1 month. The other, they gave them, they had them ingest them for 3 months. In the second group, the group of 3 months, more than half of them found that they had constipation. They dealt with constipation and fatigue. So fatigue coming from obviously low thyroid, constipation, that's pretty normal with symptom of low thyroid. And most of them, their symptoms resolved after they stopped eating the soy. Some of them had to receive some thyroxine supplements afterwards, but overall they resolved their symptoms because it was only 3 months of this. But think about how long babies are drinking formula, and the levels. Here's the deal. They got these symptoms in 30 days. Some of them showed these symptoms in 30 days. 3 months had even more symptoms. The levels of isoflavones they're taking in from the 30 grams of soybeans is well below what the babies are getting from soy formula. So U.S. National Research Council has stated that the amount of soy phytoestrogens in soy formula is 6 to 11 times higher than the amount known to inhibit thyroid hormone synthesis in adults. 6 to 11 times higher than the amount known to inhibit thyroid hormone synthesis in adults. And we're giving it to our babies. There's another British study that compared the vegan diet to or people who ate a vegan diet to people who eat an omnivorous diet. And they showed, the people who ate the vegan diet showed elevated TSH levels and a higher incidence of goiter. Okay. Again, I'm linking to these so you guys can check them out on your own if you want to dig deeper, but I'm kind of getting some of the highlights on these. There's so many that we just, again, we don't hear about them because the money from the soy industry is really driving the marketing. It's driving what we hear. And because it's a big business. And it, again, soy is probably in at least 50, 60% of the food in the grocery store. Okay. If you know, if you're in the aisles at all, if you're not around the perimeter with dairy and veggies and fruit, produce and meat, even there it's starting to invade, isn't it? Because we got the meat burger, the fake meat, the beyond, well beyond what you should ingest, actually is what it is. But the Beyond Burgers, and we have soy milk, soy cheese, but it's in all the processed foods in some form or another. It's a filler. So this was this British study attributed not only the soy intake, so not only the thyroid inhibiting factors from the isoflavones that the vegans are at greater risk for, but the fact that vegans are also at greater risk for deficiencies in B12, zinc, and cobalt, which also play a role in the thyroxine synthesis. And they attributed this to the phytates that can block nutrient absorption in the gut. So there was actually a warning on veganhealth.com about telling people who eat a lot of soy, they may not be getting enough iodine. They're warning they may not be getting enough iodine because the most common sources of iodine in the US and Europe, Western diet in general, are fish and milk. Vegans clearly aren't eating fish and milk unless it's like, they're sneaking it when nobody's looking. But, if you have vitamin deficiencies, B12, zinc, and cobalt are, primarily found in animal foods. B12 has to be. Zinc, high in red meat and fish, cobalt as well. You're going to, these are animal-based nutrients where we can, B12 is not found in any plant. So the phytates there's a lot of phytates in soy, which cause gut disruption and block nutrient absorption. Even if they're not getting enough in their diet to begin with, and then they can block it when they're trying to absorb it because of the phytates. And then as well, iodine coming from fish and milk. It's just set up for a deficiency in the nutrients needed, as well as the phytoestrogens blocking the synthesis of the thyroid. So it's really has a multi-factor effect. And now you've probably heard soy, people recommending soy to lower cholesterol levels. Okay. It actually has an odd effect on cholesterol levels. It can go one way or the other. It can go either way, really. And this is definitely a soy industry driven recommendation. But if you look at, looking at quality versus quantity of cholesterol, a little bunny trail here on the cholesterol issue. As if high cholesterol is something that we should all be scared of, and which we, lowering our cholesterol, we'll have to lower our cholesterol to as low as possible, right? That's the mantra. And yet no one's looking at the quality of the cholesterol or the environment. Is it an insulin sensitive environment, or is it a high insulin, hyperinsulinemia environment, right? Which would affect, is it full of triglycerides? Is that cholesterol because your triglycerides are high? Or is that cholesterol number high because you got this light, fluffy, pure cholesterol that's bringing nutrients all over your body? So again, quality over quantity being the concern, but we'll stay with the just stay on track here. I'll come back here on track with the lowering cholesterol. Even that bears some scrutiny. soy can increase T4, okay, which could lower blood cholesterol levels. Yes. But if it only elevates, it would lower T3, or it could elevate T4. Pardon me. Got those mixed up. It could actually increase T4, which would lower your cholesterol levels. But if it only elevates T4 and not the T3, you're probably going to have some fatigue, some weight gain. You're definitely going to have impaired thyroid. Okay. Now, it can lower it, but not the way you want it to. And let's think about how another way it might be lowering it. If you're taking in more phytosterols or creating more phytosterols with soy protein and plant fat, as opposed to animal fat, which is the cholesterol. Okay. We use cholesterol for cell membranes of many things. We use it for creating hormones, sex hormones, which again, another disruptor of soy. That's something else soy disrupts, I should say, not a disruptor of soy, but soy disrupts our sex hormone production or sex hormone absorption. But we use cholesterol for hormone production. We use it to coat the lining of our nerves. We use it for cell membranes. Okay. And if we start replacing cholesterol with phytosterols, would that not affect the function of cholesterol, of all those functions of creating hormones, of how it affects our brain, synapses connecting, coating the nerves, and how our cell membranes function? Cell membranes that have lipid rafts on them, which control insulin receptors. Those lipid rafts hold insulin receptors. Okay, and if we have a very fluid, so think about a cell wall is more solid. Ours cell membrane is more fluid. It allows more easy transfer in and out of it, and it's more malleable. When you start getting phytosterols in there, that cell membrane can become more rigid, which would affect its function. And then you start affecting the lipid rafts and the function of the insulin receptors. I don't want anything messing with my insulin receptors. I like them nice and sensitive, and I like them, functioning as they're supposed to with animal fat, as I was born with. Right, I was born with, as being an animal, born with cholesterol, performing these functions. That's what we want to keep, not replacing it with phytosterols. So that was a brief little bunny trail there as well. But again, this is not how we want to lower cholesterol. If that's something you need to do, let's take a look at your sugar intake, your alcohol intake, maybe total carb intake, and try to get the triglycerides down and see how that improves your cholesterol quality, as well as getting rid of some of these soy, canola, safflower oils, these vegetable oils that I've mentioned before, previous episodes. But again, if it increases your T3, your T4, but not your T3, you've got impaired thyroid. Yeah, your cholesterol is lower, but you've got a thyroid problem. So the real problem occurs is when they're depressing their thyroid with dietary soy, right? And then they treat the problem with a thyroid drug like Synthroid. So you're depressing it with your diet and then trying to bring it back up with a pharmaceutical. This is what researchers do to induce thyroid tumors in lab animals. So here we are with thyroid cancer. Higher incidence of thyroid cancer we know from the isoflavone ingestion. How do they create thyroid cancer in lab animals? They feed them soy to lower their thyroid through their diet, and then give them Synthroid to raise it back up and create a tumor, create growth. So according to an environmental scientist named Mike Fitzpatrick, a serving of soy food provides up to 3 times the gastrogenic potency of thyroid inhibiting drugs. So if they're using something to bring someone's thyroid down, or in a lab, such with a lab animal, in a lab situation where so they give them a thyroid inhibiting drug, either, so again, for people who have hyperthyroid, or in their research, they'll use these thyroid inhibiting drugs. Soy has 3 times the gastrogenic effect of the thyroid inhibiting drugs, a serving. So you think of 30-gram serving. So yeah, soy is marketed as a health food, even a protein alternative, as I mentioned before, of a great high absorption. Right? We can argue that as far as those phytates in there affecting the absorption, but the side effects, potential health risks, really need to be considered. And we're not hearing those. We're not hearing those nearly as much as we are about, oh, it could help this, it could help with breast cancer, it could help with heart disease. I don't know, anything that impacts our hormones to this degree or has such a strong association with cognitive decline, we can't consider it harmless, as if there's only upside. If there are some of these other benefits, can we not find those benefits somewhere else in something that doesn't have the risk associated? So again, soy is in the majority of our processed food. Even if you aren't eating, soy food, you're not eating necessarily soy milk or tofu, or you're not eating them in large amounts, soy cheese, something like that, you're likely consuming it in other foods like bread, snack bars, cereal, salad dressings. It's just pervasive in packaged food. So, and not to mention, it's the primary oil, soybean oil, as I mentioned in another episode. Soybean oil is the primary oil used in restaurants. You're not getting olive oil. Your food's not being sauteed in coconut oil or olive oil, is it? It's too expensive. They're using soybean oil, especially if you're going to anything, any kind of sub 5-star. You're getting cooked a food that's been sauteed or fried in soybean oil. You'd hope it was butter, right? But no, it's soybean oil. So you really have to be deliberate about avoiding it, and understand that most of the benefits of soy that you've heard about, they're industry funded marketing, and it's a huge industry. If you think about just one producer of soy milk and other soy products is DuPont Chemical. Okay, DuPont Chemical, huge corporate company, energy, chemicals, soy milk, soy products. Unilever, one of the biggest food oil manufacturers in the world. Okay, not fossil fuel oil, but food oil, right? Huge. There is so much money behind this. There's people talk about, oh, that was funded by the cattle industry. Okay. Cattle ranchers who are not, they're all independent for the most part. Yes, there's CAFOs. Yes, there's things that need to change there. But there's no amount of money that compares to what you see from processed food companies, DuPont Chemical alone, Unilever alone. Then you pull in ConAgra, PepsiCo. Yeah, all these guys they don't just make one product. They make there's so many subsidiary food companies under these. They're all branching out into health foods because it's become a thing to do. It's become a thing to eat is soy. You've noticed that. I'm sure you've seen it. That's the story. The Beyond Burger, right? The fake meat, as if that's the better alternative. So any of these, okay, soy being the hormone disruptor, but none of these foods are good for us. So you have to be deliberate about avoiding them. Now, my resource on this, I found a fantastic book. It's called The Whole Soy Story by Kaayla Daniel. If you have interest in digging more into soy, I mean, she has the gamut. This is just one one aspect that was mentioned in there, um, or one problem, I should say. She goes deep and wide. I mean, she deals with hormone disruption, how it's made, the production of it, comparison of it as a protein. It's an incredible book. So I highly recommend it if you have an interest in learning more about the dangers of soy. The Whole Soy Story by Kaayla Daniel. In the meantime, just avoid the soy. Have a great week.